Hi, everybody. Welcome to the UK Deaf Leadership Summit, the latest webinar. This is the last in the series for 2023. This is hosted by Deaf and Hearing Trailblazers, Action Deafness, and International. So we're grateful for that. And also what's of paramount importance today is our guest speaker. And we are welcoming Jeff McWhinney. He's a deaf social entrepreneur and also a consultant. I've got some questions prepared to ask Jeff about his deaf leadership journey. And it is going to be a very interesting hour with Jeff. So just want to say welcome to Jeff for taking part.
Well, hello. It's really nice to see you, Craig.
Yeah, it's really great to see. I haven't seen you for such a long time, but I know we have crossed paths at various points.
Always over the years. I mean, and it goes back quite a few years.
So, Jeff, we've got an hour. The hour is yours.
Great.
So if I have some prompt questions to start with, so maybe I could ask you, I mean, it is about deaf leadership, of course, this webinar. So, of course, I want to go back to the beginning. So maybe your school years. So, what was it about deaf leadership that at school that prompted you into deaf leadership?
I mean, really, when I look back and think about what was going on for me back then, I actually started at nursery school, my deaf leadership journey, if you can believe it. When I arrived at the nursery, and to be fair, you've got to remember I'm from a deaf family. My parents are deaf. We have a deaf heritage in my family. So on entering the nursery, I realized that the other kids couldn't communicate like me. So this was the first time they'd ever seen signing in this school environment. So for me, I had to take the initiative. I had to really show everybody where outside play was and get into it right from the very get-go. So when we think back, that's when it started for me. So looking back, it's quite profound, isn't it? And moving to school in England was obviously a big change for me because it was a very strict oralist regime at the school that I attended. It wasn't easy for me, but I found my way through my school years. And at the end of that, I really imagined that I wanted to go into law. That was where my aspirations lied. But teachers at the school said, well, that'd be impossible. You don't have speech. You know, you're not going to be able to be a solicitor in today's world. I ignored that advice and applied, nevertheless, to a university to study law. But the same thing happened. The door was slammed in my face by them too. So I went on a very roundabout journey to where I am today because of that.
It's interesting you talk about your school time and, not having sign language in school. I mean, I had to laugh when you say you started at nursery because, of course, it just seemed natural for you to just get involved. And having that deaf family background, of course, that helped you along. I mean, you established a sign video, VRS, years ago, but I just thought I wanted to ask you, you've had so many aspects to your career. Can you sort of tell us about your career journey a bit?
Sure, of course. After school, I mean, I was in Belfast. I'm an Irishman myself, so I started off my school career in Belfast. So I wanted to work at a charity there that was really about access to social care. Then an opportunity came up at a health board in Northern Ireland, and the social services aren't council run there; it's direct from the government. So I applied for a job there, but wasn't successful. I got very close, apparently, but was unsuccessful nonetheless. And then it was advertised again 8 months later because the person that got the job had pulled out. So I reapplied. And once again, apparently, it was told that I almost got the job. So I don't know what was going on there. But I had a friend in London who really encouraged me to come over. I was on a week-long holiday there. A job came up that I thought looked interesting, and I applied for it. I got interviewed. Well, they wanted to interview me the next month. Of course, I was flying home, so I was lucky that they let me come in and have an interview. I had to wait until everyone else got interviewed a month later, but I got offered the job, so I moved to London. So that was a real that was at the Breakthrough Trust. And that's obviously where we started getting on because you were working at FYD at the time, weren't you, Craig?
Yeah,
So
those were great years.
yeah, we were the two young guys, both kind of promoted forward at the same time. Those are good years. I then worked at the GLC for a while as a disability in the disability resource team, and from then to Wandsworth Council in the finance area. And I got a promotion when I was working in that team, and they also sent me on a day release course to do management studies. So that was great. Really useful for me and a real confidence builder that they saw potential in me. So I was really honoured by that. And from moving on from there, it was a disability organisation in Greenwich, in London. And then the BDA job came up, and I thought, well, at the time, I'm 34. I'll just put in an application for the experience of it and perhaps get it the next time it comes up when it's re-advertised in 10 years or so. So I went in for the BDA CEO interview and I was dumbfounded by the result, but just got into that position and got on with that job. And when I look back, at the old See Here interview that I did at the time, I was talking about my vision for the BDA being in the community. And I think that in some ways, we've achieved that. When we think about Northern Ireland and Scotland and all the offices back then and what's going on, I think that, we have got out into the community. So, yeah,
Yeah,
there's a lot to
so
unpack.
much.
And then obviously with the head office moving to Coventry, my family's very important for me too. I've got deaf kids. There wasn't the right educational opportunity in a bilingual setting, so I decided to step back at that point, and that's when I set up Sign Video, and the rest is history. So that's my career in a nutshell.
If we can go back just slightly there, so if it wasn't for Breakthrough, which is obviously now called Deaf Plus, giving you that opportunity, what would have your path been like? I mean, maybe completely different.
Look, I think this is really important, and we really need to recognize when these opportunities come up, when these doors open for us. It's vital that we do and that we're brave and we take risks like that. I moved from Northern Ireland to London. It was a big step at the time, but and you yourself, I know you're from the north of England and you moved to the south at the same time, and to have that fortitude is really important.
Yeah, I can empathize with you on that. Um, I'm an inland immigrant. I mean, you're a proper like immigrant from the Isle of Ireland, to move to England, yes, but culturally and also opportunities had to be grabbed, and it takes courage to do that. Yeah, so I can imagine. But the journey is fascinating. What you said, you started with a deaf charity and then later got into local authority, and then you've picked up more about management, learned those skills, got that training, and that was really a useful tool for you. So, I mean, I need to tell the audience that you were the first deaf BDA chief executive. The first deaf. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that? Because you've said about the Irish connection.
Yeah, sure, of course. I mean, taking on that role, I felt the huge weight of historical responsibility because, you know, it's the person you're in the seat for the vision of the BDA and the future of the BDA. And of course, the first person to set up the BDA was Francis McGinn, a Belfast man. And it's a sad story in a sense because his portrait I used to see in the Deaf Club and not even know who he was at the time. It was only later when I became the chief executive, I realized that this portrait that I passed all the time, the Deaf Club, was the guy who set up the BDA. And we often lack a celebration of our own history and heritage. So I'm really pleased to see that there's more recognition through the British Deaf History Society starting to get out more information like that. You know, the schools really need to look at this dearth of information about our own history.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
It also had its challenges at the time. You know, when I started at the British Deaf Association as the CEO, one of the big things really was, we celebrated having a deaf CEO. But when I went into my first senior management team meeting, it was a very different atmosphere. I'd kind of taken a step up. A lot of these people were hearing. They could feel the winds of change and a balance changing. So those were often difficult discussions, and it was a very enlightening experience for me to do that. And there was people that couldn't sign, so a lot of the others decided to speak in this meeting. And you think that's so odd for me as a deaf CEO to be in my own senior management team meeting and they're speaking English. But what it took, of course, is just good practice and confidence in me. And over time, I really enjoyed working with that group. It was hard at the beginning, but I managed to transform them.
Yeah, I think, the board support was absolutely vital. If the board are empathetic, then that's just adding to the pressure on the role of CEO back then. I mean, it was the first real task, is to decide how to manage things. I'm going to hold on that part actually and come back to that later because that's a really important part of your leadership journey. But Jeff, on a light-hearted note, please tell us who your real role models are, who have been your mentors, and how have they inspired you on your own journey?
Okay, I can do that. I think really, my career, if you summarize it, has been political and social entrepreneurship. So, one person that I looked up to very early on in my life was Steve Biko. So he was a student activist from South Africa, and his story is incredible. He wrote a book called The Black Consciousness. And as I read that book, I could see all the parallels with deaf people's experiences. So, for example, when you challenge authority, people telling you to water it down, to not make things worse, to not, make trouble because people are well-meaning. And the same thing used to happen to me. It was my father actually that was challenging authority and other people in the community telling him that it was better that he didn't do so. And you don't achieve change if you don't stand up for yourself and challenge authority. So from that, I wrote The Deaf Consciousness, an article for a journal. He inspired me to do that about how deaf people can achieve equality. And I think that today this is just as relevant in these times of change. Lisa Kalpinen, or Dr. Lisa Kalpinen, is an amazing deaf role model. She was given the Medal of Honor from the United Nations, and rightly so. Why her? Because at the time, when I was 26 years old, I was preparing a proposal to the World Federation of the Deaf for a World Youth section, and she listened to me. I tried with other board members of the World Federation of the Deaf at the time, the WFD, and she was the general secretary. They were all naysayers saying that it was impossible and unachievable, which was very dispiriting, and left me downhearted. But in talking to Lisa, she was incredibly positive. She wanted to explain the process, that it would take 4 years before a formal proposal, that it wasn't going to be possible. So she was very pragmatic, but she was open and she listened and she gave us good advice. She never just said it was too late or impossible. And this position that she took was really made a difference to me. And when I set up Sign Video, at the time, I liked Richard Branson because of his very casual approach to business. He wasn't all buttoned up and formal. And I liked elements of his leadership and the fact that he's dyslexic as well. So that's quite an achievement for him to have done that in business. So those are my role models.
Yeah, I do remember Steve Biko. I remember seeing the film Cry Freedom. And that had a real impact on me as well. Then, yeah, I read his book too, quite some time ago, but I forgot you'd written the deaf consciousness. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Because deaf consciousness you wrote back then, and why is it different now?
Sure. I was just talking about elements of the deaf consciousness. So, for example, I mean, back then at the time, people were often talking about the fact that we have to tell deaf people, look, it's reflected in the language. We must tell deaf people what they have to do. And in fact, in our own language, we would say, hearing people told me. So the way that we actually place them psycholinguistically, so therefore, it's an embodiment of the impression that we're going under coming out in our own language. And we see that much less now. The younger generation talk about their hearing friends on the same level as them, the same horizontal level as them. When they sign, they don't have this hierarchy. So these subtle changes in our language do really show a change in mentality of deaf people.
That's an interesting subject. And you're right, there's parallels that you can see there. So yeah, I get that. Um, if we move on to kind of activism, I think your activism that you have came from your father, is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
because
absolutely
what did your
right.
father do in Belfast?
Well, it was a big thing. It was quite explosive in Belfast. At the time, we had missionaries running the deaf centre, and my father was very dissatisfied with that. And he and other deaf people wanted to organise an event. And when they did, they had to go through the missionaries because they held the budget. And my father wanted to separate that out into a deaf club. So there were six of them that agreed, and my father was the ringleader, that they would go and approach the missionaries and the system. And they heard from somebody in advance, and actually in the church service, stood up in the pulpit and said, Harold, for that's my dad's name. That's my dad's name. You know what? You've got something to say, haven't you? And my dad was like, "Well, we're not going to talk about it here. It should be done outside." The missionary insisted that they talk about it there. So my dad went up and said his piece. He was told summarily that nobody agreed with him. And then the six of them, I think at the time, four of them suddenly got afraid. One stood up with my dad. And so my father realized that the odds were against them and that the game was up. So they set it up independently themselves later, but you can see a very powerful experience.
And you've got some of that from your father, I can see that. And that probably led you to what you became today. I know that probably your children are following your example too.
I, I think it's hard to deny. Um, I think also my father did teach me, for example, when the milkman came to do the delivery, my father would write notes to him, uh, even though he couldn't read, and we realized that back then hearing people, it was a problem that everybody had. So my dad was very good at explaining about social issues like that and being able to see things from a different point of view, see myself as equal to hearing people. I think that was really critical for me in terms of how you think of yourself and how you think of equality.
It's like an evolution. So what you've learned through and how you change that process. Um, there's always some of that kind that breaks through that ceiling and evolves in the upbringing to lead you on to what you are as an adult. But I mean, you've already talked to us from a boy to a leader in the deaf community and the start of being proactive. I remember you mentioned about sport. Is that right? When that started?
Well, I think I was only 19 at the time and I became the secretary of the Ulster Deaf Sports Council. So I did secretarial duties for them. And at the time, we were going through an awful lot of change. There was a lot of political upheaval in terms of the North and the South. I mean, there's obviously athletes want to represent Great Britain. There was a lot of turmoil politically and in the sporting arena too. And if you were born in Northern Ireland at that time, you could play for Ireland, not Great Britain. There was a lot of so that caused a lot of consternation. There was a lot of communication between us and the CISS at the time. A Denmark guy called Knud was running the International Deaf Sports Organization, and in the end, we managed to move forward on the citizenship issue. But there was a lot of debate at the time, a lot of politics about identity and individuals, and that again was an instructive experience.
I agree with you. I mean, deaf sport is, you've got the Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and they each have their own very strong identities and very strong political identities as well. So I do understand that. And it must have been quite a challenge for them having to make a decision kind of which route to go. Wales, England, Scotland, it was kind of more straightforward. Scotland were not so much, but Northern Ireland, it was very political. Just to touch base to say whether you're going to be part of Ireland or Great Britain. So yeah, I do remember the challenges around that time.
For sure, for sure.
Anyway, okay, so moving on. I just want to. Oh, actually, I wanted to say congratulations on becoming chair of BSLBT, the British Sign Language Broadcasting Trust. So you've become chair. What does that role mean for you, and why were you so attracted to it?
Sure. I mean, I think the reason I went for this one was, there's major challenges coming up in this sphere. Broadcasting is going through some seismic changes. You know, we appointment viewing is a thing of the past. I mean, we've obviously gone through video recording and all these different manifestations, iPlayers, and so on and so forth. And in this digital age of broadcasting, the future will hold lots of things that we're not entirely sure of. We might be able to, obviously, we can choose programs that we want to watch, but the BSLBT, we've got our own BSL zone, which is fine. But looking at it, there's a rich array of programs there. There's no doubt about that. But there is a feeling that there's still more room for expansion. The environment's right for me to become the chair because I think, we've got a new Deaf Chief Executive in position, in Camilla. She's a visionary, and she's a leader too. So it's great to see her there, forming a team around her. My own personal stake in this is I've got children, I've got grandchildren, I've got my deaf parents. So there's all these intergenerations in my deaf family, and I want to see programs that really reflect some of the more controversial media issues in our community. We need to take a more mature stance, and Camilla agrees with this. So I think the time is right, really, and the opportunities there with digital broadcasting for us no longer to be restricted by this 9 p.m. threshold that has dictated a lot. So I think things can get on the move. We've got a fantastic board as well, so it's a really great situation to be in. We've got Channel 4 and Sky representatives on the board, as well as deaf leadership. So I think that the time is absolutely right for me to get involved and for things to move forward.
That's brilliant. I mean, I know you've only just started in your role, but you've got the board, you've got the team, you've got the CEO, and of course, there's a challenging agenda. But what you've said is it's really interesting. Thinking about the broadcasting culture, how the world has changed, with live streaming now, it's not just about what's on TV, it's what's available on the internet as a whole. So really exciting times for a BSL zone, I'm sure.
I think it's exciting, but there's also with that an attendant risk that people exist in bubbles and develop a very silo mentality and not think about other programming and other types of content. And so there's always a risk of being stuck in a kind of repetitive groove like that. So we've got to ensure that people can be broad-minded and see the full gamut of what's available.
I think that's part of your new journey going ahead as well. You've had all these experiences. You've kind of got the technology aspect with sign video, which I'm going to come on to later. But all this kind of builds to today in this new role. I'm just wondering, what do you think are the characteristics of leadership? I've picked humility as one to talk about because I want to ask you, what does that mean for you, humility, and how does that represent you?
I mean, it's a funny word, isn't it? And I think when you ask somebody what humility means for them, you get different answers. For me, I think I mean, obviously how you behave, first of all. It's not really a principle. It's more a case of, from my point of view, uh, don't get into self-promotion. It's not about that. It's about the team that you're with and what you can achieve as a group of people. We talked about that inside video, and we can discuss that later. But for me, that's critical that you think of everybody that you're in the situation with. There obviously are different types of leadership. There's people that like to, direct very much from the front. Some are backseat drivers and encourage people to do teamwork. We know all the different leadership styles. I'm more of a person that likes people to set the direction, be a backseat driver. in small and close-knit communities, we also have what's called tall poppy syndrome, amongst other things, and this desire to keep everybody equal. And I can see where that comes from. I think most people in the deaf community talk about crab theory, and I actually don't like that. I disagree with it. I don't think it works because it kind of means that people are crawling on each other's backs, right, to get to the top. And I don't think that's how it works. I think the metaphor is tall poppy syndrome. I think that's what I see going on. People who become prominent in the community or high profile being cut down. I think of my wife Brigitte. You know, she's half Finnish, and I remember going to Finland. Uh, and you know, the farms are up in the forest, and they'd cut down all the trees and leave the tallest trees, and they would then seed the next generation of trees. And I kind of like this as a base philosophy, and you can use it in leadership as an example. Because they have a 30-year harvest cycle. So it's long-term planning as well. You know, and I said, well, you're going to be dead. And it's not about that. It's about thinking of future generations. So that it encapsulated a couple of key aspects of leadership. Do the best you can now, but also think about the future.
Yeah, that tallest poppy is so interesting. I like the philosophy of the trees, leaving the tallest ones, those protecting branches. So yeah, I can see it visually. I get that. So I think, you know, it's not about going forwards and coming back. It's about humility. It's about demonstrating and putting others first before yourself as a kind of concept. Do you agree with
Oh,
that?
yeah. Also, don't give people a task to do that you wouldn't do yourself. Okay. You know, I think that's really, really important. People are quite happy to devolve and delegate tasks. They don't listen to the people in their teams, and that's a concern.
And that's really interesting. That's your vision, idea of humility. You know, the tall tree. I really like that. I like that so much. Um, okay, so I wanted to ask you. I think the audience have been waiting for this. But we know you, Jeff. You've worked for organisations, not just locally, but also regionally, nationally, internationally as well, of course. And you know, you've talked about the deaf sector, but also the voluntary sector, and statutory sector, and private sector. So could you tell us what's been the most outstanding moment in your leadership journey?
Let me think. There are two. The first I have already covered. The second, I think, would be what was unexpected. And that was the Cisco system, which is the global telephone platform. And the CEO came over from America, and we were there to discuss technology platforms in relation to sign video. But a question was asked, like, is there any excitement in the UK? And one person that I was supposed to meet, he was, if there was just silence in the room, and it's just, I met a person who is deaf and spoke about the signed video platform. And the CEO said, I'm coming. Well, he came. I was well prepared. I had everything done. I had my arguments ready in terms of negotiating costs. But then the CEO appeared. And in discussions with him, he asked numerous questions like, why are you doing this? Why are you building it? And then afterwards clapped his hand and said, right, okay, so can we look at a discount? And he said 100% discount. And the interpreter and I just looked at each other and looked over 100% discount. And the salesperson was looking rather shocked and then walked off. And we were just left there 100%. It ended up being zero, like 100%. It was free to be given to me. It blew me away. And I think it was because I was already prepared, asked the difficult questions, and I was ready with the answers. That was incredible. It was wow.
Unexpected, but sometimes unexpected it can happen. The unexpected can happen.
And how you capitalize on it is critical, rather
Yes,
than being in a
absolutely.
panic state and being humble and being honored to meet you. None of that.
But you also had government support as well, didn't you? Can you tell us about that? Because you've got Cisco, that's the company, the technology company, and the government. How did you manage to accrue both of those?
That was through working in collaboration, a local collaboration with the London councils, the London Borough councils, and they would have a get together called the GLA, the Greater London Authority, and they would have regular get together, regular meetings. And I spoke about the issues of access for deaf people to access the council. And through those conversations, I think there was 25 council organisations. In total, there was 33, but from seven political parties that did not turn up, which is not a surprise. But that aside, there were 17 of them that were willing to support this idea. And from that, from the GLA, they had funding to be given. And that was the startup of Sign Video, with 17 of those organizations contributing. And that was providing it through website access. And so it was access to interpreters online.
I mean, it just seemed to be right time, right place. I mean, quite incredible that you were part of that.
Yeah.
I mean, back then, technology was like,
That's right.
it wasn't
Yeah.
an excitable thing. It was there, but we got on with our everyday lives, and then suddenly
Yeah.
it came about, and now technology is more important
Yeah.
than it ever has been. So again, looking back, you started the journey on that, and now look at Sign Video and what they are now, and it started from your seeds.
Incredibly proud. I am incredibly proud. It's opened up the opportunities for deaf people to make phone calls. Now, when I started Sign Video, I was working as a deaf professionals, knowing the good interpreters that I want to book in advance. But there were occasions when cancellations were made and the interpreters just sitting there and there wasn't any work for them to do. And I would ask them to make phone calls. And it was clumsy, and it was how many other interpreters would actually sit there at the desk waiting either for a meeting when there was a need, that were out there with hospital appointments, emergency situations, could not source interpreters, job interviews, couldn't source interpreters. And looking at this situation, I wanted a resolution of some kind, and that was Sign Video. And, there was always phone calls that needed to be made. And it was always a barrier, having to wait until we got an interpreter to make those lists of phone calls to organize meetings. But with Sign Video, it was on par with hearing people. It was an on-demand, and we could pick up the phone at any time, equivalent to hearing. But we always worked with interpreters from the beginning. My wife, Brigitte, is an interpreter. So both of us worked together. We brought together deaf and interpreters as a team to spoke about. But at that time, interpreters were somewhat resistant to the American model of, this type of call center approach. And what we were trying to say is that, no, that is not the case. But we were fortunate in having good interpreters that were willing to trial that with us. And out of it, we got things out of it that we didn't expect. And that was the improvement of skills, because deaf interpreters had to voice over a whole range of deaf people, whereas in the past that wouldn't have happened. And the voiceover was very minimal in comparison to sign language. In this case, it was 50-50, and interpreters themselves improved their skills, and more joined us, and we expanded. So it became a benefit to both parties.
Yeah, I agree. There's benefits to both. And in some situations where people, I'm sure we've thought about like remote work, the use of interpreters and how to utilize that time well.
Oh, yeah. And limitations. Interpreters online should not do long meetings. They have to be broken down into bite sizes. And my concern now is that there are some people that think, I don't need to book an interpreter because we've got interpreters online. That is not the practice I promote. You need real people. And there are interpreters that need to work in the community as well as being online.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was the vision then. Is it nearly 30 years ago? Is that right? 1995.
No, hang
27
on.
years ago.
Are you talking about sound video? Almost 20 years ago. Next year, it will be 20 years old.
I'm just thinking about the vision must have been more
Oh, yeah.
longer
Oh,
ago
no,
than
it was
that.
well before that. It was actually 1985 when I saw it right at the very beginning. I was mesmerized by that, and that was through the GLC.
I do remember that, but we're not going to talk about that right now
Oh,
because
yeah.
that seems like forever ago. But the seeds were there, weren't they? That brings me to ask you another question. When we're talking about entrepreneurship, because obviously we've got signed video there, but you know, I think you've broken the glass ceiling. You've gone through the glass ceiling. You know, that's my view of you. You've broken through that glass ceiling. But what's your glass ceiling moment? When did you break through in as an entrepreneur?
Let me think. There wasn't one single moment. There were tiers to that glass ceiling moment. But the first ceiling was Wandsworth Council took sight of me, had trust and confidence in me, and sent me to university to do business. I was impressed by that moment. I felt resilient in doing it because back then there was very few. I think there was only one. There was only one. That was Lillian Lawson with the BDA. She was the only manager. There was very, very few around at that time. The second moment was the BDA at national level. They already had STD. Susan Daniels. There was actually Susan Daniels at the National Deaf Children's Society. She came to be. But I think it was more in the commercial world would be signed video. That's when the glass ceiling absolutely blew open.
I mean, we could go on and on that. But more importantly, I wanted to ask you, what have been your greatest achievements for you? What's been your greatest achievements in your career, your leadership journey so far?
Right. Oh, it is wide open how to answer that question. I think actually it was the work of bringing together deaf professionals and interpreters together to develop signed video, because at that time, some interpreters were saying, this is impossible. I do not want to sit there in front of a video camera. I will not do that. So it was dealing with that. But then bringing in those interpreters that were, and those deaf, and now there are many interpreters that approach me and say, now I can do my voiceover. Now I don't have to go to a conference to learn about the different regional accents. I can do that from the comfort of my own home. That was incredibly inspiring. Deaf people were saying, I was able to work during COVID times. I mean, that was phenomenal. Can you imagine if there was no signed video, deaf people would not have been able to work? Imagine that impact. I would say that would be my greatest achievement.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sure, as you've already mentioned, your humility, and you also mentioned family.
Yeah. It's personal. It's a personal achievement to see my deaf children raised, to see the barriers being pulled down and they are succeeding. One is a teacher in France teaching French children English. There's so many. My daughter is an actress, travels everywhere. full time. So to look at them, because back then it simply would not have been possible because of the amount of barriers in place. And also society's attitude has changed, and that's helped a lot. That has helped us to become leaders and the changing of society's attitude. And I think that would be our greatest achievement.
I agree. It's interesting when you said society's changed. And yeah, linked to that societal change, obviously you were the first deaf CEO of the BDA, and now the BDA is moving forward with their 10-year strategy. In comparison, yes, society's changed, but how can you compare your time and the time that's coming?
I am still a member of the BDA. It's in my heart. That will never change. But there is one good thing. Back then, if you can remember, there was the FDP that were a protest organization for BSL recognition. We were behind them on that. Then there was a splinter organization. There was between the RNIJ and the BDA was seen as extremist, but then FDP was seen as even more extreme, but they came back to us because we were less extreme and talked to us more back then. Now the BDA now has the BSL Alliance, because BDA is not the only voice, it's the collective voice. And that is important, and I think it's good. And then in terms of their priorities, early years education, I think is also important, because if you look at the area of education, it has changed significantly from our time. There's a reduction of deaf schools, children accessing the classroom through communication support workers, therapists, one-to-one. Peer groups are missing now. All of those different elements will have a knock-on effect to other elements. You know, team sports as an example. In my time at school, after school, we would have football get-togethers. That doesn't happen to that because people are being picked up by a taxi from their school to home. So they're missing out on that element. It's not just within education, but it's also within society and within the sports arena. Yes, there are a lot of things that are great. Employment was a barrier back then. It seems to be more because of the economy. You know, when you look at education, you look at employment, but the BDA has done well. But what is going, the next 10 years will apply? What are we going to be talking about in 10 years? Will computers have taken over? Will AI have taken over? I think it's good to start thinking. I think it would be good for them to start thinking ahead.
Yeah, I think you're right, because at your time you had a vision of what could work for the BDA back then. I mean, you started the ball rolling, if you like, with the BSL 2003. I mean, that was like the cornerstone of going forward. Then there seemed to be a gap, and now it's finally come up again with the Act last year.
And on that, yes, progress has been made because of FDP lobbying at that time as a collective. And when it started, there was a lot of resistance and a lot of deaf organizations. I think at that time, we estimated around 37 deaf-related organizations. 35 signed up the petition to government. Government had seen sight of that and put together a collective. So again, here we're talking about a collective.
I think what is important is that you pushed for that. I mean, you and your team, you pushed for that back then.
Yes.
So it's kind of like having that push and the momentum gets going, and then something happens. The FDP, Federation for Deaf People, is that the right term? Yeah, just so the audience are aware.
I have to say that we had a fantastic team, and one person was an expert with a lobbying background and did absolute Trojan work. I have to say they did Trojan work on this. But one thing about leadership that you should know about is recruiting people that are better than me in the same field. Yeah. I couldn't have done what that person was able to do. but working in partnership, working as a team, enabled us to make progress.
Yeah, I think that because you can't do everything. You're the leader, but you're not expected to do everything. Therefore, you need a team around you to be able to deliver whatever your goals are. And it's
Exactly.
your job to steer and encourage and support. Yeah, I'm thinking about leadership from different perspectives, but I mean, you've already talked about, being the backseat driver. You've mentioned that, and that's kind of that you really typify that style of leadership. I mean, obviously, how you support and people through uncertainty and difficult times. How have you managed to do that as a leader?
Right. When going through difficult times, it's important to sit down and, as far as possible, put it on the table. Some situations that might be cited would be, okay, let me think, would be restricted. But it's talking about as much as possible. Put it on the table, listen to people, listen to their contributions, because maybe I'm naive and just seeing the barriers. But if someone else puts in a contribution, you can start to think differently. I'm trying to think of an example here. Normally, in bad times, causes restructuring. Restructuring, really, is confused. Is an euphemism for downsizing. All organizations need to downsize from time to time. For example, the pruning of a tree. You have to prune it back. But the problem is, which branch do you cut on that tree? Which branch do you keep on that tree? And I think a lot of the boards and leaders are left in a situation of looking at people. You have to look at people, they're saying we have to look at what's important for the organizations. How do we get there? What do we do rather than the person? So when that is presented, people make their contributions, and some people would say, right, okay, I will offer voluntary redundancy. So you go through that process, but it's not about not giving them choice, giving them ownership of their future careers, but not impose, but it does happen. And at the end of the day, you do have to impose some situation to reduce a significant impact.
Yeah, I can really empathize with you on that. Very clear. And
Oh, yeah.
it's not nice and it's not a pleasant experience for deaf leaders like yourself to have to go through that. But if it's necessary to reduce the impact, but kind of going back to basics and growing again. Yeah.
Yes. And I also think, and to add to that, it's that obligation. We live and work in the same community.
Yes,
Most
absolutely.
leaders do not out there. So we have an additional burden in this setting.
The burden. Totally agree with the burden. Again, linked to that. What's your advice for deaf leaders on who people who want to bring about change in deaf leadership? What's your vision and your concept?
Number one, like you, we are risk takers. Go outside of your comfort zone. Risk on its own cannot be done without passion. You must have passion. If you can see the why, you can see the achievements and how to articulate that and how it can be achieved and make the move. Support networks. Now, I have my family, I have Brigitte. To do this on my own would be tough. It's having that support. It's having the buy-in to the vision and the support that is essential. The third thing is be prepared to change. If you're bringing in a new team and they'll say, oh, well, that's not going to work. Listen to the why. before progressing, but make the breakthroughs, because in some ways they will often know more than I as the leader, and the leader has to be humble in saying, I don't know everything. So those are 4 elements. In terms of change leadership for today, I have observed that our old generation, you know, the old bogies from way back then, from then until now, there are more open opportunities. People are out there. People like my son are out in education and elsewhere. They've branched out in one way that is so wonderful, a fantastic achievement. But at the same time, you're looking at deaf organizations and the board are finding it difficult to recruit people who are committed. But the same people keep popping up elsewhere, but there's a need for fresh blood. That would be an issue that needs to be a consideration. Thinking about people's current careers and where they are heading to, but how do they feed back into the deaf community? It's an awkward issue, but I think it's something that we need to look at.
I agree. I wanted to pick up on 2 follow-up questions, actually, from what you've just said. I'm interested to know a bit more about your view. I mean, I can see you're right in that deaf people are having wider choices now, having accessibility, and they can go wherever they want to achieve something, whatever career they want to embark on. That's the fantastic part of education. But also about deaf people themselves. I mean, I have to say, there's more deaf leaders out there now who are recognised and acknowledged compared to back then when it wasn't fully acknowledged. But there were a number, especially of those who were strong within the deaf community. Whereas now the deaf community leadership, I'm talking about deaf club kind of deaf club leadership, seems to be dwindling. But mainstream world, maybe mainstream isn't the right word, but you know what I mean. You know, people working in whatever sector, whatever companies, you can see deaf leaders out there in that environment. And that seems to be, is that enriching and encouraging, or is it still a burden?
There are 2 things that come to mind. Mainstreaming and being out there is actually a good thing, because hearing people now see deaf people as equals. They're out there. They're on television, they are visible, whereas in the past we were hidden and excluded. The second point on that is, let me think. I think it's, you know, like the old-fashioned working men's club, they are on the decline, so are deaf clubs. But I think there is a loss there. We've lost that collectivity. Because I remember my father going to the deaf club, and there were other deaf people that were go-getters, they were active, where for some people, through not their own faults, did not have a good start in life, as an example. But the community would help each other. People like my father would help them. There was that kind of relationship in place. But now I think that is just on a very, very slim string. You know, that's why I spoke about the education system being critical, because for those that do not have that start are going to be lost up, because we don't want to leave deaf people behind. And we're starting to see that gap that exists, and it's not healthy for any community, irregardless if you're deaf, hearing, or any other minority community.
That's a sensitive issue, isn't it? I agree. I'm realizing we've kind of got about 5 minutes left. I mean, I'd chat for another hour. That's what I'd really like.
I know.
It's been fantastic to have your insight. So maybe you can tell us what your plans are for the future.
Right. As of now, I'm no longer with Sound Video, but I've set up a consultancy business called Vortex, and that includes referrals from business agencies where deaf people are interested or may be considering support for a business plan and so on. So that is a commercial enterprise that I'm doing. And also there is the BSLBT. So I have two approaches that I'm dealing with now. One, I want to consultancy. I want to see people progress. And also stubborn people, working with them, it's like, all right, it's your choice, but giving them that information irregardless of their stubbornness. With BSLBT, I have the greatest hope that they will remain for the long term and move into the area of digital broadcasting and possibly global. Because a lot of people watch BSL Zone from overseas. The number of viewers are increasing from them.
Jeff, on a personal note,
Right.
I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure to cross paths with you. I mean, this has been really important. You were a very humble person by nature, but no one should forget your achievements. So what you've gone through today, I'm sure there's so much more that time doesn't allow us to go through. I know you've set up European and World Deaf Youth as well, in connection with WFD, EUDY, is it? Something like that. But there's so much more. But more importantly, you've achieved so much through your leadership journey. And people should aspire to that. It's so fantastic. You're an activist by heart and an entrepreneur by brain. That's Jeff McWhinney.
There you go.
You've inspired a lot of people along the way, and you've made people feel, actually, if you can, I can. So yeah, in terms of your humility and philosophy, and of course your entrepreneurial, you're a trailblazer. You are a trailblazer. So fantastic.
And thank you. It's lovely to hear something like that from a man of your esteem and all of your successes. You are also a trailblazer, but I appreciate you and thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for being a guest speaker today. So we have come to the end of the webinar series for this year. We will be having 4 possibly new speakers next year during the summit webinars, which we're looking forward to as well. But last but not least, a million thanks, Jeff, for your wonderful words, talking about your journey of deaf leadership. It's been a pleasure again, Jeff. Thank you.
And also, I would like the interpreters in the background going from BSL to English. So let's thank the interpreter, Andy Carmichael, Catherine White, and your interpreter, what's her name? Sarah. Lovely. Thanks all to them. And thank you for organising this.
Thanks. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.